What do you think would happen if you combined the Joker, Conquest, Homelander, the Green Goblin, Lex Luthor, and Ronald Reagan and blended them all together? You would probably get the most evil being in all of existence. Or Vince McMahon. If you're a casual wrestling fan like me, there's no way that you can escape this man's name. The man, the myth, the controversial legend, Vince McMahon. For nearly half a century, he was professional wrestling. He took what was once a regional carnival sideshow and turned it into a global, multi-billion-dollar empire. He created icons out of Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. He sold out stadiums, produced movies, and somehow launched a football league twice. But behind all of that was a man whose real-life decisions will become darker than anything ever scripted. This is the story of how Vince McMahon built his empire, and what it apparently cost everyone around him. But before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe. And yes, this video was supposed to come out before WrestleMania, but if you're a long-time watcher of this channel, you already know. These videos basically come out when I feel like it. But let's get into the video. Vince McMahon's story starts with, well, Vince McMahon Sr. Vincent James McMahon Sr., known as Vince Sr., ran a regional wrestling promotion called Worldwide Wrestling Federation, the WWF, based in the northeastern United States. It was a family business passed down from Jess McMahon, Vince Jr.'s grandfather. For most of pro wrestling history, the business essentially operated the same way gangs do. The country was divided into regional territories. Each promoter controlled their own turf, and nobody took talent from the other guys. And it worked, until Vince Jr. came along. In 1982, Vince Jr. purchased the company from his father, Vince Sr., who would die of cancer not long after. He made his son promise to keep the territorial agreements in place. But according to multiple accounts, including ones from wrestling historians and former employees, Vince Jr. broke this promise almost immediately. He began signing talents from other territories and negotiated national television deals. He signed Hulk Hogan away from AWA in Minneapolis, and within just a few years, regional territories that had existed for decades were essentially wiped out. Many promoters who had built their entire careers in the business were left with absolutely nothing. Vince Jr. ended the wrestling wars, but at what price? He did it by breaking the rules everyone else had agreed to live by through very shady business practices. It was the first time, but far from the last time, Vince McMahon would do business in this manner. But to understand Vince McMahon, you first have to understand the concept of kayfabe. Kayfabe is the most important thing in the world of professional wrestling. It refers to the practice of presenting the scripted, predetermined nature of the business as real. The rivalries are real, the feuds are personal, the matches, their outcomes, their moves, their drama, all completely legitimate athletic competition. Obviously, all of this is a bunch of malarkey. The outcomes are predetermined, the punches are mostly misses, the blood, at least historically, was self-inflicted with a hidden razor blade, a practice called blading, and the storylines were written by a team of writers. But for most of the 20th century, admitting any of this was considered the cardinal sin of the industry. Wrestlers were expected to maintain kayfabe everywhere, at the grocery store, at the airport, even with their own families. Vince McMahon himself finally broke kayfabe publicly in 1989, and he did it strategically. By registering WWE as sports entertainment rather than athletic competition with state athletic commissions, he avoided paying certain taxes and fees. He admitted his product was scripted when it saved him money, but denied it when it was time to sell tickets. The reason why kayfabe matters in this story is simple. Vince McMahon spent his entire career in an industry built on deception, on making you believe something was real when it wasn't. He wanted to control the narrative by any means necessary. Keep that in mind as we go forward. But by the early 1990s, the WWF was the biggest wrestling company on the planet. Its roster looked like it had been sculpted by a comic book artist. Enormous bulging physiques that defied natural human biology. Steroids were an open secret in professional wrestling. And in 1993, the secret became a federal case. Vince McMahon was indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of conspiracy to distribute anabolic steroids to his wrestlers. The government's case alleged that McMahon had not only been aware of his wrestlers using these steroids, but was actively facilitating their distribution. The trial began in 1994. Former WWF employees and wrestlers testified. The prosecution argued that Vince McMahon had created a culture where steroid use was encouraged, even expected, because the enormous bodies his wrestlers had were part of the product he was selling. McMahon was ultimately acquitted of all charges in July 1994. His defense successfully argued the government could not prove he directed or distributed the steroids himself. But the acquittal didn't erase what came out during the trial. The picture was painted of a boss who built a business on a physically impossible standard. Men who could not have looked the way they looked without chemical assistance. For the wrestlers themselves, the physical toll was real. The steroid era of professional wrestling is directly linked to the wave of premature deaths that swept through the industry through the 2000s. Heart failure, liver disease, drug dependency. Vince McMahon would walk out of the courthouse a free man, but many of his wrestlers didn't walk away from their own bodies so cleanly. On May 23, 1999, a pay-per-view event called Over the Edge broadcast live to hundreds of thousands of homes across the country. In this event was Owen Hart. Owen Hart was a genuinely beloved wrestler, technically gifted, funny, charismatic, and by virtually every account, one of the nicest people in the locker room. That night, Owen was performing as his character, the Blue Blazer. As part of his entrance, he was lowered from the rafters of the Kemper Arena in Kansas City by a harness. Descending dramatically into the ring, the stunt used a quick release mechanism, but the mechanism was released too early. Owen fell approximately 76 feet. He landed chest first on the top rope and fell into the ring. He was pronounced dead at Kansas City Hospital later that evening from internal bleeding. Here is where Vince McMahon had to make a choice between basic human decency and profits. Can you guess which one he chose? Exactly. He chose for the show to continue. After a brief pause and an in-arena announcement, WWE proceeded with the rest of the pay-per-view event. Commentator Jim Ross delivered the news of Owen's death to the at-home audience mid-broadcast, and the matches continued like nothing even happened. WWE would later argue that performers were trying to honor Owen by continuing, but most of them didn't immediately know the full extent of what was happening. Martha Hart, Owen's widow, did not accept that explanation. She sued WWE for wrongful death and won a settlement reported at approximately $18 million. She has never forgiven Vince McMahon and has consistently refused to allow WWE to commemorate Owen in their Hall of Fame or programming. Martha Hart has said publicly that the stunt should have never been approved, that the equipment was faulty, and that her husband's death was preventable. Since Owen's death, she has dedicated years of her life to performer safety. Owen Hart was only 34 years old, and he now lives on through his 2 children. Running parallel to all of this was the actual content Vince McMahon was putting on television. And for a significant stretch of WWE history, that content was something else entirely. Let's start with race. For many years, Vince McMahon has been accused of being, a little racist.
Keep it up, I'm a nigga.
Just a little.
If you're not Caucasian, then leave. Mark Henry.
Now, I'm not saying Vince McMahon is racist.
Truth be told, I'm not a very big fan of the black people.
But this isn't a good look. In 2005, WWE introduced a character called Muhammad Hassan, who was played by Mark Capone, who was an Italian-American man and not Arab at all, by the way. He promos about being unfairly stereotyped after 9/11. The character had genuine potential to say something real, but instead WWE used him as a straightforward Muslim extremist terrorist villain. Eventually staging a segment where masked men in ski masks attacked The Undertaker at his direction. This aired the same day as the July 7th London bombings. UPN, the network that aired SmackDown at the time, pulled the character off the air immediately, and Mark Capone effectively never worked in the WWE ever again. Then there's Crime Time, a tag team introduced in 2006 consisting of 2 black performers whose entire act was built around robbing people, running cons, and broad criminal stereotypes. Then there was Akeem the African Dream, a white wrestler in the 1980s who was given a gimmick when he returned from a trip to Africa. He began performing exaggerated black stereotypes, speaking in a fake accent, and dancing in a way designed to mock African culture. His manager told the audience that deep down inside, his client discovered he was African. Christ, man. This is crazy. Then there was Saba Simba. WWE took black wrestler Tony Atlas, a former tag team champion, and put him in a tribal face paint and an African warrior gimmick, complete with spear and shield. Tony Atlas has spoken numerous times about how uncomfortable and degrading the experience was. Mind you, there have been only 4 black wrestlers who have held the WWE Championship. the entire time Vince McMahon was CEO. All four, by the way, would lose to Brock Lesnar in some ridiculous fashion, which is interesting if you know Brock Lesnar's relationship with Vince McMahon. There's also the Mexicools, a group of Mexican wrestlers who rode lawnmowers onto the ring. The 2000s were a crazy time for WWE. There's also Vince McMahon's treatment of women, both on screen and, as we get into it, allegedly off of it. On screen, female performers were regularly booked in bra and panty matches. These were basically segments where women were asked to perform acts of humiliation for the entertainment of a live arena crowd. And then we have the Kiss My Ass Club, a public humiliation ritual in which Vince McMahon would drop his pants down on live television and force an employee or performer to literally kiss his bare ass. Employees, authority figures, legend of the business were all made to kneel and kiss Vince McMahon's ass on live television. The Kiss My Ass Club is treated as comedy, but looking back on it, it reads as a man in total control of other people's livelihoods, making them debase themselves for his entertainment and calling it a punchline. But what can you expect from a company that treats its employees like sharecroppers? And I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that. Did you know the men and women of the WWE that perform 250 days a year, who take chair shots and go through tables and fall off ladders, are not employees of the WWE? They are classified as independent contractors. Here's how it works. The independent contractor classification isn't about avoiding taxes, but it low-key is. It means that under US labor law, independent contractors generally cannot form a union and cannot engage in collective bargaining. By classifying every single performer as an independent contractor, WWE doesn't just deny themselves benefits, it strips them of the legal framework that would allow them to organize in the first place. This means that WWE wrestlers don't receive employee-provided health insurance. They don't receive pensions, they have no union. They can't collectively bargain, and they pay their own travel and hotel expenses. Meanwhile, WWE controls virtually every aspect of their professional lives. The company owns their characters, their ring names, their catchphrases. WWE tells them when to perform, where to perform, what to say, how to dress, and whether they win or lose. This is worse than a 360 record deal. This is essentially a 720 deal. You see, in the 1980s, at the height of WWF's national expansion, a wrestler named Jesse "The Body" Ventura, who would later become governor of Minnesota, attempted to organize his fellow wrestlers into a union. Ventura saw what was happening. Vince McMahon was making enormous sums of money on the backs of performers who had no health insurance, no pensions, no job security, and absolutely no leverage. A union was the only logical response. Ventura approached Hulk Hogan, who was the biggest star in the company and the one person whose involvement would have made a union impossible to ignore. If Hogan was in, others would follow suit. But someone told Vince McMahon about the union, and Vince made sure no such union would ever form by allegedly intimidating multiple wrestlers and staff. It would later come out in a court deposition years later that it was Hulk Hogan who told Vince about the union. Jesse always had his suspicions that it was Hulk Hogan who told Vince because he was the only person at the company he told at the time. McMahon wouldn't fire Ventura because he was just too popular at the time, but the message was received loud and clear. Organizing had consequences. The union effort died before it even had a chance. Ventura later sued McMahon in a separate dispute over unpaid royalties and won. He has spoken openly in interviews about the union attempt and Hogan's betrayal of it. Multiple legal scholars have argued over the years that WWE's independent contractor classification is fraudulent on its face. The level of control WWE exercises over its performers meets every practical and legal definition of an employment relationship. The National Labor Relations Board has rules specifically designed to prevent companies from misclassifying employees to deny them organizing rights. WWE has never been successfully challenged on this classification. And every single time a performer has pushed too hard or raised too many questions publicly, they would find themselves quietly deprioritized, released, or simply never called again. During the COVID-19 pandemic, WWE released dozens of performers, citing cost-cutting while simultaneously reporting record-high profits. Because those performers were independent contractors, they had no severance protections, no unemployment insurance through WWE, and no legal recourse. Some had been with the company for a decade or more and just found themselves out on the street without a job. In 2011, the wrestler CM Punk described the situation between the talent and WWE perfectly. Talent who Vince liked got pushed to the top, while talent that didn't fit his vision got buried. Vince McMahon built a multi-billion-dollar empire on the backs of people who, legally speaking, he didn't even claim worked for him. In June of 2022, the Wall Street Journal published an investigation that rocked WWE's corporate world. The journal reported that Vince McMahon had paid approximately $12 million in secret settlements to at least 4 women who had made allegations of sexual misconduct against them. The payments were made over roughly 16 years and were kept off of WWE's books, a potential violation of securities law since WWE is a publicly traded company. Among the allegations, a former employee claimed that McMahon had coerced her into a sexual relationship and paid her a $3 million settlement after she left the company. Following the journal's report, WWE's board launched an internal investigation. Vince McMahon agreed to step back from his roles as CEO and chairman while the investigation was conducted. The investigation confirmed the payments had been made. McMahon resigned as CEO and chairman of the WWE in July of 2022. A stunning fall for a man who had run the company with absolute control for 4 decades. But it wasn't over. In January of 2024, a federal lawsuit was filed in Connecticut that made the hush money scandal look like a footnote. Former WWE employee Janelle Grant filed a complaint against Vince McMahon, former WWE executive John Laurinaitis, and WWE itself. The allegations in the complaint are deeply disturbing, and I suggest all of you read it for yourself because what is alleged is very graphic. Grant alleged that Vince McMahon had entered a sexual relationship with her that she describes as coercive, in which her continued employment was contingent on her compliance. The complaint alleges that McMahon then began sharing her with other men, including other WWE executives, without her free and full consent. The complaint alleges that McMahon sent explicit messages, making explicit demands, and used his position of total power over her career as leverage to control her. McMahon denied the allegations, and his attorney called the lawsuit a work. The lawsuit led to McMahon resigning from TKO Group Holdings, WWE's parent company, in January 2024. He has not returned to the wrestling business since. A federal investigation is reportedly still ongoing. Now, there is also a very weird connection he has with someone which may or may not affect these court cases. Vince McMahon and Donald Trump have been friends for decades. He appeared on WWE programming multiple times, most famously at WrestleMania 23 in 2007 in the Battle of the Billionaires. Their friendship is real and long documented. Linda McMahon, Vince's ex-wife, served as head of the Small Business Administration during Trump's first term. When Trump returned to the presidency in January 2025, he appointed Linda McMahon as Secretary of Education. Now, this video is not alleging any conspiracy, but you don't think it's a little weird? A man facing a federal civil lawsuit alleging sex trafficking, who resigned in disgrace from the company he spent his life building, has been remarkably quiet ever since his oldest political ally returned to the most powerful office in the world. And the federal case that was reportedly active has moved very slowly. Maybe that's a coincidence. Maybe that's just how the federal legal system operates. Maybe it's just nothing at all. Or maybe, in the grand tradition of Vince McMahon himself, the most important story is the one being told behind the scenes. He spent 40 years making you look at spectacle in the ring. Maybe, just maybe, it's worth paying attention to what's happening outside of it. Thank you for watching.